all used to seeing political spouses out on the presidential campaign trail, but we have never really seen a political spouse quite like Doug Emhoff. In many ways, he's an unlikely force on the campaign trail. I mean, he left a massively successful career in entertainment law when he became second gentleman. And he did that to avoid any conflict of interest. How refreshing. He's a person deeply connected to his Jewish faith, and he has taken a front and center role in the fight against anti-Semitism. And at the end of the day, he is a proud wife guy. He doesn't shy away from talking about his wife, from defending her, and from advocating for many of the same issues that drive her, like abortion rights. We talked about those issues and much more when I caught up with him on the trail at a small business in Wilmington, North Carolina this week, where he was talking to voters about his wife's economic plans. I want to ask you about an economic issue that people always think of as an economic issue, and that's abortion rights. And your wife, Kamala Harris, the vice president, has been outspoken on this issue long before she was the nominee. She was traveling across the country talking about this issue. But you've also been front and center in talking about abortion rights. And you've also encouraged more men to be in the fight of talking about abortion rights, which is often thought of as a women's issue. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, look, after the Dobbs decision came down, she called me right away. She was actually on Air Force Two and said, Dougie, they actually did it. And we had the leaked opinion. We knew it was coming. But the fact that the Supreme Court would take away a fundamental right that had been on the books for 50 years, a right that my mom, who's now 83, back in the day was fighting for equality, abortion rights. And the first person I heard from after Kamala was Ella, who was 23 at the time. And she texted me and was like, we need to fight. We need to do something about this. And then I literally heard from my mom saying the same thing. And then think about this. My 83-year-old mother is somehow going to enjoy more rights than Ella? It's wrong. This is all because of Donald Trump. He ran on a platform of women should be punished for seeking an abortion. He said that. There's video. He ran on a platform of appointing Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade. They did just that. And he is for a national abortion ban. Make no mistake, where he says, I will be the protector of women, that is yet more lies and more gaslighting.
He also says women won't have to think about it if I'm elected, which...
Women meant we should be furious about this gaslighting, and furious, and turn this anger into action.
You've also been front and center in the fight against anti-Semitism, and your faith has long been important to you. You've talked about it quite publicly. And if the vice president is elected, you would be the first Jewish American to be a first partner, first gentleman, whatever you may call yourself. How does the history of that weigh on you in the moment?
Well, I take being the first Jewish White House principal ever. I take it very seriously. I take the responsibility. I'm accountable for it. And if you recall, even before October 7th, and really at Kamala's urging, we really leaned in on this fight against anti-Semitism on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration. And we put forth the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, which was released in May of 2023. So we had that out there. And then when the horrific day of October 7th happened, the administration was ready to take action. It's something that I've been working on, speaking about, meeting with released hostages, hostage families. It's intense. And a lot of times I don't want to do it. It's too raw. It's too emotional for me. And she is the one who keeps pushing me out there because of the responsibility that I have in this role, and because she cares about these issues. She is out there fighting these issues just like I am. What really bothered me a week or so ago is when Trump got up there at an event purporting to fight anti-Semitism, and he said vile anti-Semitic things, long, tropes that are just terrible. And, we have to speak out every single time when something like that happens. So I'm going to continue not to be afraid, not to be intimidated, not to live in fear, but to live openly and proudly as a Jewish person.
When you hear him say things like that, and he said that if he doesn't win, it will be essentially the fault of Jewish Americans.
Blame the Jews, one of the oldest tropes.
An old trope. I know you put a statement out on X at the time. Do you worry that he's putting a target on the backs of Jewish Americans?
He is. I mean, take him at his word. He lies about a lot of things, but you've got to take him at his word on things like this. So, yeah, this is a disgusting trope, with this so-called dual loyalties. It's an outrage. And it's not just Jewish people that should be outraged.
Do you think he's anti-Semitic when he says things like that? Do you look at him and see the repetition of this type of words and language as anti-Semitic?
Of course it is. And I've said that publicly. Definitely.
I want to ask you also about Mark Robinson, because we're sitting here in North Carolina. You spoke about him just at this event. He also reportedly recommended Hitler's Mein Kampf as a good read. He called himself a black Nazi. He is still the nominee for the gubernatorial race here. Josh Stein is obviously a great candidate. What do you make of that as you look at the state of the Republican Party?
It's pure cowardice. It's shameful. It shouldn't be this way. We need a strong Republican Party. We need people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger who've come out and endorsed Kamala Harris, where you may not agree on every single idea and policy, but you agree on who we are as Americans. You agree on our Constitution and who leaders should be. So when you have someone who's made comments like Mark Robinson, he's clearly unfit, unhinged, should not be running. And the fact that Donald Trump was right here in Wilmington, right where I'm sitting, where he couldn't disavow Mark Robinson. He's trying to ignore it, but he did not disavow what Mark Robinson said, his candidacy, and it's just shameful. It's just shameful. And Donald Trump's the guy who said this guy's a star. He said he's Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids. Hasn't disavowed any of that. So Donald Trump is supporting Mark Robinson. Those are the types of candidates that he's supporting. And we can't have it. It just shows you yet another of the many, many examples of why Donald Trump is just unfit for any job, let alone President of the United States.
Something that has also been an important part, or an interesting part of how people have talked about your role here, is how your role has reshaped the perception of masculinity. And I'm not sure you planned on that, but you are an incredibly supportive spouse. Has that been an evolution for you? And do you think that's part of the role you might play as First Gentleman?
It's funny, I've started to think a lot about this. I've always been like this. My dad was like this. And to me, it's the right thing to do. Support women. It's mutual. Like with Kamala and I, we support each other. We have each other's back. And I've said many times, when we lift up women, we support women, whether it's pay equity, child care, family leave, and all these issues that, this post-Dobbs hellscape, women should not be less than. Women should not have less rights and be treated differently. That's not the American way. And it's also not like, if some woman succeeds, some dude out there is suffering. It's not a one-to-one relationship. When we lift up women, we lift up families, we lift up the economy. And when I was in the business world, it lifted up the organizations that I was in. It certainly lifted up the White House when you were there, with you there and Kamala as vice president. It was a great workplace there.
There's a pop culture phrase, wife guy, which you've kind of been known as. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard about it.
As called a wife guy, a proud wife guy? How do you feel about that?
Well, if I do something annoying to Kamala and she gets upset, I'll just show her that article.
Right.
And I'll say, I'm trying.
Or a T-shirt or a mug.
Yeah.
There are certainly people, who I'm going to ask you about, who are not as comfortable with fierce women, strong women, intelligent women. One of them is, of course, running against the vice president, Donald Trump. He seemed to be uncomfortable on the debate stage, and he sort of amused post that about how people thought this woman did better. He's also refusing to agree to a debate, which she's already agreed to. Do you think he's scared of debating her?
Yes, he should be.
The other thing I have been thinking about a lot is how it must be for you when you see people attacking your wife. You had a pretty strong response recently when Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders attacked the vice president, suggesting that because she didn't have biological children, she, quote, doesn't have anything keeping her humble. I know you spoke out about that when you were asked about it, but I bet it pissed you off at the time. What was your initial reaction as a human being when you saw that?
Well, as a human, as her husband, but also knowing how much she loves Cole and Ella and how much Cole and Ella love her, and how the kids think of Kamala and Kirsten and myself as this three-headed parenting machine. It's just inaccurate. And it's just disrespectful. And it starts with the mispronunciation of the name, which the governor knows exactly what her name is and how it's pronounced. So it's just this, they're thinking that by, beating people down or trying to, that somehow shows strength, instead of just talking about issues that help people. And attacking people for being a biological mother or not, which seems to be an obsession of her and J.D. Vance and others. It's just, it's not where the American people are. There's so many families like the Emhoff Harris family out there. There's so many women.
I'm part of one of them. Many people are.
Mother figures or mothering children. So it's wrong, it's inaccurate, and it just shows who they are.
We have more of my interview coming up, including things like, what are Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff binging in their free time? And what did he say to Gwen Walz before they went on stage at the convention? He answers those questions and more. But before we go to break, if you weren't up late last night, you may have missed this.
Guys, how amazing is Kamala? I mean, look at her! I feel like I'm in one of those movies where Seth Rogen dates Charlize Theron. I mean, how did I get this woman?
You might be asking yourself, what's it like being married to the most powerful woman in the world? Well, it turns out, in many ways, they're just like you and me. The country is getting to know your wife. They know her, of course. They're getting to know you. What do you guys do when you have downtime? Is there a show you're binging?
There's not a lot of downtime right now. I'd say in the before times, we loved Shogun, not just because it won all the awards.
Show.
It was one of those things that was so great. I can see that she watches a little bit of The Bear here and there.
How do you know?
Because, on the resume.
Oh.
But I can see, though,
she's
that
ahead of
I
you?
watched it, yeah, and the show can get a little stressful. So I'm sure right now it's probably not the greatest show to watch when we're just trying to be out there. I know she talked up Hacks because she watched that.
That's a good show, too.
I didn't. And when that won the awards, she was like, what a great show.
Now, she's a great cook, loves to cook.
She is.
You've said she's tried to teach you to cook. What can you cook now that she taught you?
So this was kind of a COVID era thing when we were together, and it was a little unfair that she was cooking all the meals, and I said, can we eat less? And she said, no, you need to learn how to make a few things. She said, just learn 2 or 3 things. So it was like baked chicken, grilled salmon, and make some rice and maybe saute some spinach. So that's about the extent of it. My grandfather taught me how to do scrambled eggs when I was a kid, so I can actually do great scrambled eggs and then a few other things. But
great scrambled eggs.
It's good though. That comes in handy. I'm telling you.
That's your cooking bio.
And people come for that, so it's good.
Now, one of the things that I think the country has loved to see is the relationship that you all have with the Bidens and also with the Walzes. And Dr. Biden gave you some advice when you became the running mate. And you also passed on advice to Gwen Walz. What did you pass along to her?
So when we first met the Walzes as couples, it was then right before we went on stage in Philadelphia. And they came in, and it was so overwhelming. And I said, look, nice to meet you. We went through this exact same thing 4 years ago. I know exactly how you're feeling, and just how Jill was there for me and said, don't worry, I've got your back. I've got your back. I'm going to get you through this thing. And literally, as we were walking out in front of 20,000 people, she's like, what do I do? I said, you just grab my arm, and I'll just follow me, and walk right out to your husband, give him a hug, and we'll do this.
Now, one of the things you've been doing still while you've been second gentleman is teaching at Georgetown Law School, which you've enjoyed, and you've said you enjoyed. Is that something Dr. Biden is still working that you'd like to continue as first gentleman?
Definitely, definitely. And I loved being a lawyer, 30 plus years as an entertainment lawyer in Hollywood. I miss it. When I talk to some of my old colleagues, they're obsessed with politics. I'm like, hey, what's happening in town? So being able to teach at Georgetown Law School and teach entertainment is something to keep my toe in the water, so to speak, and get students right before they go out as lawyers. So, and Dr. Biden was great. Right, especially at the beginning when we'd be on the plane together and she's grading papers and doing all this. I say, oh, okay. I guess I need. And so she gave me a lot of tips on how to be an effective teacher, which really helped. So yes, I plan to continue to teach when Kamala wins this election.